Hello everyone, welcome to the part 2 of this series learning Windows PowerShell in my channel Telugulo Telusko. This particular video we are going to talk about something called as commandlets in PowerShell. So as I told you in the beginning of this particular series in the introduction video, commandlet is nothing but a command in Windows PowerShell. So if you normally think of any command in any programming language, when you execute a command, what you get back is an output. So the same is the case with Windows PowerShell, but there are slight differences when compared to different programming languages. So we are going to understand what is a commandlet first in this video, and then we are going to see the difference between a normal command and a PowerShell commandlet. So let's get started. So a commandlet is a lightweight command that is used in the Windows PowerShell environment. So that's fine. We know that commandlet is a keyword that is specific to Windows PowerShell, and it executes some code in the background when you run a command and then gets you the output. That's absolutely fine. And then commandlets are instances of .NET framework classes. I told you at the very beginning of this series in the introduction video that PowerShell heavily relies on .NET framework, which means PowerShell essentially is built on .NET framework. So whatever the command you are typing in PowerShell and executing to get an output, in the background under the hood it is using .NET classes to perform that operation. And these are not standalone executables. So which means if you are aware of any of the standalone commands that you have used in command prompt like ping.exe or icackles.exe to restore any file permissions and so on, so these are separate .exe files, executable files in the Windows operating system, but the commandlets are not. Commandlets are not a standalone executable files. They are part of the Windows PowerShell itself, and they are working in .NET framework under the hood. Commandlet performs an action and typically returns a Microsoft .NET framework object. So as you know that PowerShell is built on .NET framework, so the output that you are going to get back onto the console is an object. So why is that special? We are going to definitely look in the next upcoming videos, because objects are whole things that we deal with within Windows PowerShell, and that is what it makes PowerShell really special and more powerful, because with the help of objects we are going to do a lot of things within Windows PowerShell, and we are going to demonstrate that in the next upcoming videos. So now we understand that commandlets are nothing but a commands, and when you execute a command you get an output in written. That's fine, but where do you get these commands from? That's the question. So we are going to look from where we are going to get all these commands from. So essentially, if you take a look at this diagram, PowerShell is right here, and we are talking how to get the required commands into PowerShell is the discussion. So essentially the commands come from three different places. The first place is based on whatever the operating system version you are running on, and the second place you can get the commands from is the snap-ins. So these are called PowerShell snap-ins. And then the third place where you can get the commands from is modules. So there are three different places from which you can actually get the commandlets into PowerShell. So for example, let's take you have a Windows 7, and Windows 7 by default comes with PowerShell version 2. So what it means is in Windows PowerShell right here, it has some capabilities to deal with operating system. So the required commandlets to manage Windows 7 machine are actually in the PowerShell engine, which means let's take an example of Windows 7 has 100 commands to manage the operating system. So PowerShell now has 100 commands within its shell. Now you install something called as a snap-in. Snap-ins are the old way of actually extending the PowerShell engine, which means whenever you are actually dealing with some technologies like Exchange, SQL, Active Directory, you install required tools onto your Windows server, right? So with that particular tools, there comes some of the snap-ins which have commands to actually deal with that particular technology. For example, example, let's say if you have Exchange, and when you install Exchange you get the Exchange snap-in, and Exchange snap-in has 50 commands to manage the complete Exchange environment. So now PowerShell has 100 and then another 50 commands within the PowerShell engine to deal with the things. And then there is something called as modules. Modules are typically a script file which consists of various different commands to deal with the technology. So snap-ins are the old way of extending the PowerShell engine. So it actually with the version 1, and after version 1 we did not use snap-ins anywhere. So it's all about modules. So it's the new way of extending the PowerShell. For suppose you have installed SQL now on your Windows server, and SQL module has somewhere close to 200 commands to manage the complete SQL technology on that server. So now the PowerShell has 200 commandlets additionally added to the PowerShell engine. So the total commands within the PowerShell that you get is 350, right? Now let's take another example where you have server 2019. So server 2019 comes with version 5.1 of Windows PowerShell. So version 5.1 has somewhere close to 1500 commandlets to manage the complete operating system. Now the PowerShell has 1500 commandlets to deal with the operating system. And then forget about snap-ins, because I said snap-ins are the world way. Now if you install Active Directory on that particular server, and also you have installed SQL on that particular server, Active Directory has its own module. Module is a set of commandlets to deal with that particular technology. So modules, Active Directory module has somewhere close to 300 commands to deal with the complete Active Directory technology on that server, and then SQL has somewhere close to 250 commandlets to deal with the SQL technology. So now what you get is 300 plus 250, which is somewhere close to 1850 commandlets within your PowerShell to manage that particular environment. So this is how you normally get commandlets into your PowerShell engine. So typically it's based on the OS version that you are running on, and then modules that you have installed on that particular operating system. Now I just want to make one more thing clear at this point, so that you will be at a very good understanding how to get commandlets. Suppose for example you have Windows 7 again. Windows 7 by default comes with version 2, and then Windows 7 has somewhere close to 100 commandlets to deal with your operating system. Now imagine that you have upgraded your Windows 7 PowerShell version to version 5. So, and then on the other hand you have Windows 10, which by default comes with version 5.1, which has somewhere close to 500 commands to deal with the operating system. So let's say assume this. Now do you think that after upgrading Windows 7 version 2 to version 5, do you get the same 500 commandlets to deal with the operating system? No, it's absolutely not. So based on the PowerShell version, your commandlets are not going to just be the same on various different operating systems. So as you're still running on Windows 7 operating system, probably you get another 150 more commandlets to support using the version 5, but it doesn't mean that you will get the actual capability of Windows 10, which is having version 5.1 by default with 500 commandlets. So that is not going to be happening there. So you need to keep that in mind. Though you are running on the same version, some of the commandlets are specifically designed to deal with the operating system. So in this case you are still running with Windows 7, you might miss on those features, but Windows 10 by default has a lot of capability. So PowerShell produces various different commands to deal with those capabilities in the operating system. So this is something that you need to keep in mind. And then if we move on to the understanding the commandlet syntax, so essentially PowerShell commandlet syntax looks very similar to this. So you have a verb and then a noun. A verb and a noun. A verb actually says what action to be performed, and the noun actually tells on what place or what thing I need to perform that action. So PowerShell consistently follows this naming convention for every commandlet they produce. So there is a legal list of work that PowerShell uses within their commandlet. So I'm going to take you through those legal list of verbs in the next slide. But I just want to understand that this particular commandlets always follow a particular naming convention, so that it will be very easy for someone who is coming from a different programming language, or someone who's beginning to understand PowerShell has much more flexibility in dealing with things. So by looking at this particular example, I can clearly tell that it is going to get all the services on my computer. Get service, right? So people essentially normally tend to call this as get service, but there is always a dash in between the get and then the service, so you need to keep that in mind. So now taking a look at this example, can you just try to imagine what will be the command to get the processes on my computer? So it's simple, it's get, and then the noun part would be processes. The noun part would be processes. So this is something that you need to keep in mind, that PowerShell consistently follows the naming convention, and there are various different ways that you can deal with these things in terms of finding and discovering commands. So we are going to get there in a couple of minutes. So these are the list of legal verbs. These are some of the list, not the complete list of legal verbs that Microsoft follows for the naming convention within PowerShell. Get, we did already see the get a verb, and then set is to change the state of a particular thing. For example, get service is getting you the services list of all the running services, or all the services are essentially on your computer. Set service is going to change the state of a service. Set service to stop, or set service to start, something similar to that. Remove, add, clear, and copy. There are a lot of verbs that actually Microsoft uses within their cmdlet syntax, but they are very limited, so it is easy for you to understand. As you get started with Windows PowerShell, you will be able to understand which verb actually suits your requirement, and there are a lot of different ways that you can actually discover these things within Windows PowerShell, which we are going to show in a minute. And then commands to get you started. There are a couple of commands that you need to remember. Just keep these two things in your mind: get module and get command. These are the two commands to essentially get you started with Windows PowerShell, because as soon as you start learning a new technology, you will be having a lot of questions. What command to be used? How do I find a command? Where do I get the command from? These are the questions that we are going to address using these two commands. So just remember these two commands for now, and then we are going to take a look how to explore PowerShell using these two commands. So let's get into my lab environment to see how we can use these commands to get you started with Windows PowerShell. So let me just log into my lab, and then we have PowerShell running right here. So always do remember to run PowerShell as administrator. As I said before, if you are logged in as administrator and you're not running PowerShell and in administrator mode, you will be limited to some set of actions. So you will not be able to perform certain set of administrative actions though you logged in to the machine as administrator. Just keep that in mind. So first of all, to get you started, to know which version of PowerShell you are running, there is something called as a variable, which is an automatic variable. So you type $symbol and then PS version, PSVER, and then hit the tab key on your keyboard. So it automatically tab completes that particular variable for you. So when I just hit enter, so I get that I am running on version 4 of Windows PowerShell. As you can see, I am on Windows Server 2012 R2. So by default, which comes with version 4. I haven't upgraded this to the latest version yet, so that's fine. Now I told you to remember two commands, which is get command and then get module. So module, I told you before that module provides you the capability to extend your PowerShell console, which means adding more commandlets to your PowerShell console. That's fine. So now let's go ahead with get command. So when I hit get command, you can see that I get all the list of commands that are part of my PowerShell engine. So you can just go ahead and scroll through this particular list and find the one find the command that you need. But it is uh, speaking the reality is it's really difficult to find a command that you need in this whole list of information that you have on the console. As you can see, I'm just scrolling through the list, but I'm still halfway through, so it doesn't really help me by any means. So the commands are going to accept something called as parameters. A parameters is something which is going to help you to refine the search that you are going to use, but we are going to talk about parameters in detail in the next videos. But let me just use a verb parameter and say I just want to get a list of some information, right? Get some information. And then noun, what information I need to get. Maybe I need to get some processes information. Process. Now when I hit enter, as you can see, there is one commandlet which is actually shooting my requirement, which is get process. So which means when I run this command, I'm going to get the list of processes on my PowerShell on my computer. And then mostly this might not be the case. You might not know the exact noun that you need to deal with. That's when we use something called as wildcards. A wildcard is represented with a star asterisk character. What you can do is you can put your search string within this wildcard, which means I can put something like PRO and proceed with a star and end with a star hashtag symbol, and then when I hit enter, I get all the matching information with that particular pattern. You can see everything started with the verb get, and then in the command I have somewhere PRO, which is matching my pattern. As you can see, PRO in the properties, PRO here in the property, and then profile PRO. So by this way you can actually go ahead and filter the commands that you want. But what you need to keep in mind is essentially if you are going to use something like this, a complete syntax, the number of results that you get onto the console is limited, and the more easy for you to navigate through that particular command. Now I need to understand the list of commands. Right here you can see there is something called as get PS provider, so it doesn't really match my requirement. I can see something called as get process. I can understand that, okay, get and then process. Okay, probably this is the one I am looking for, because the other ones get storage provider, get net IPv6 protocol, and then connection profile. I don't think these are matching my requirement where I need to get a list of processes. The only one I am able to understand probably which will match my requirement is this get process. So I just go ahead and then copy that command and then execute that command to see if that is the information I'm looking for, and yes, that's the information I am looking for. So using this particular get command, you will be able to filter the commands that you want, and at the same time you can also use the wildcards if you are not sure about the noun part or the verb part, right? And then you can also use the get command with only noun proc proc. So I can see the list is much more smaller now. I just got debug process, get process, start process, and stop and wait process. And then I can also use the get command using the verb part, which is, for example, set in this case. So it's going to show me all the commandlets which has a verb set in it, So you can either ways actually use this particular command to navigate through the list of commands that you have within your Windows PowerShell. At any given point of time you want to see what commands you have within Windows PowerShell, just go ahead and run this, and it is going to give you all the list of commands for you. And then the other command I want you to remember is get module. So if you see here, there are currently 1 2 3 4 modules which are loaded into my PowerShell engine, but there are much more which are not loaded at this point, but they are existing on my computer as on my hard disk. So if I see get module list available, there are a lot of other modules. So each and every module here gets a lot of commands for me to manage. For example, we can see in this particular get module, PowerShell loaded only these four modules into my memory, but I have something called as active directory module. So PowerShell did not load that into my memory at this point, but I can actually load that module using import module active directory, and then just hit enter. It's going to import into my PowerShell memory, and then if I hit get module, I got the active directory module listed, which is loaded into the memory. I can now deal with get ad user and filter star, for example, like to get all the list of user information in my active directory domain. So modules are essentially the way to extend your PowerShell console capabilities. So it brings a lot of commands within the PowerShell, and you can play with those PowerShell commands to get the required information for you. For example, in this case, I just have active directory. If I would have installed Exchange on this machine or SQL on this machine, I also have a SQL module and Exchange module loaded into my PowerShell engine, and they come with their own specific commands to deal with those technologies, which I can make use of and then manage that particular environment. So these are basics of commandlets and how you deal with commandlets. We talked about the cmdlet syntax. We talked about from where you can get the PowerShell commandlets from, and we also discussed how the get command and get module works, and then we discussed about the parameters using the verb, and now how you can filter the PowerShell commandlets that exist in your particular environment. So this is all that I have for this video, and in the next video we are going to talk much more deeper about the PowerShell commands, and I'm going to install some modules and show you how the capability of PowerShell is being extended when I install a module, and how I get additional commands into my PowerShell environment. And then we can talk about how to use a particular commandlet and where do I find the required information to see how a commandlet will actually work. So there is a lot of tons of information documented within the Windows PowerShell to help you get started. I'm going to walk you through all the process that you need to get started with Windows PowerShell. And that's it for this video, and if you like my video, please do like, share and subscribe to my channel, and it will encourage me to do more and more videos for you. See you in the next video. Thank you.